And we are following breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ. It has been a busy day in the world of Major League Baseball, specifically when it comes to the Marlins and coronavirus and the fallout from an outbreak in that organization. Major League Baseball now responding, explaining exactly how the next several days will go after 15 players on the Marlins tested positive. Here's the statement from Major League Baseball. It says, given the current circumstances, MLB believes that it is the most prudent to allow the Marlins time to focus on providing care for their players and planning their ops for a resumption early next week. All right, let's bring in the host of Nothing Personal with David Sampson, the one and only David Sampson. Now, David, before we get to you, I do want to outline. So the Marlins schedule has now been postponed through Sunday. So the earliest we would see them is Monday. Also, their home and home series between the Phillies and the Yankees, that has also been postponed. The Yankees will now take on the Orioles. You predicted all of this. Now, that quote we saw from Major League Baseball, you want to go through it because you said there are some things specifically that you would like to touch on. What are they?
Well, Amanda, what's very important here are the phone calls that took place before this statement. If I'm the president of the Marlins, I am going to MLB and saying, may I have players on the active roster who we will not give service time to? The answer to that would be no. May I have players who play on the major league team who we won't count as being part of the 40-man roster? They were told no. Therefore, the Marlins said, you better give me some time because we have to go out and find players, add them to the 60-player pool because we're not calling up our top prospects. So in addition to caring for the sick, as baseball said in that statement, the real part of that statement to focus on is giving the Marlins operations team, Michael Hill, the president of baseball operations, and everyone who works for him, an opportunity to go out and scour the waiver wire, find players wherever they may be, and get them in uniform ready to go for next week. That is what the Marlins will be doing right now.
So is that realistic? Do you think the Marlins will, in fact, be ready to go, as you mentioned, while caring for the sick, the 15 players, the 4 personnel members who've all tested positive for coronavirus, going out and assembling this essential new team for them? Is that enough time through Sunday? Will we see them back on the field next week?
As long as there's no more positive tests, I think you will, because remember, everyone who's positive, they'll eventually get better, we hope, and they'll be able to be activated off the COVID list. But assuming that all 15 members stay on the COVID list for next week, they will have to find 15 new players to put into that system because, again, they're not going to prematurely call up any of their players, including their first-round pick this year, Max Mayer, including their first-round pick last year, J.J. Bleday. They are not going to be playing for the Marlins. This is a competitive integrity issue because the Marlins obviously had a chance, they thought, as part of their rebuild with the acquisitions of Villar and Aguiar and Dickerson. They thought that they had a chance to compete in a short season like this where they could get hot. Now it's just about getting guys with a pulse who can fog up a mirror and finding a way to get them on the field in order to protect their rebuild in the years ahead.
And David, you're very questionable that every team would, in fact, be able to play 60 games in this very short season here. So you have games that have already been postponed here. The Marlins taking on the Orioles. The Orioles are now playing the Yankees. The Phillies, they're on hold for a little while as well. So will we see a makeup of these games, or are they just going to go by the wayside here? What do you think is going to happen?
So let's break it down. The Phillies are going to end up missing a total of 4 games. The Yankees only 2 and the Orioles only 2 because now the Yankees and Orioles are going to play each other when they hadn't been scheduled to. And there's 6 off days. I don't know why I put 4 up. It's been that kind of day. There are 6 off days this entire season. And so they've got to find a way to get as many games as you can with the understanding that not all 30 teams will play all 60 games, and that's okay. What baseball is going to hope for, believe it or not, is that the Marlins are not in the playoff race so that they don't have to make up all their games and that they won't get into the playoffs based on a winning percentage, because right now they're 2-1. If their season stopped, in theory, they would win the division with a 667 winning percentage. And if I'm the rest of the teams in the NL East, I would say I don't want to play anymore because we can't catch the Marlins. We're not going to play 667 baseball. So you're going to see a lot of changes as the season unfolds. And the hope that baseball has, and they reiterated this in their statement, they reiterated the fact that the protocols are being followed, but the protocols will continue to be tweaked to make sure they take into account any new situations that arise. And believe you me, Amanda, this was a new situation that arrived, having 15 positive tests on one team.
Okay, I want to touch on that for a second because I need you to clear something up for me. So we learned earlier this week through reports that the Marlins, in fact, knew before they played the Phillies on Sunday that they had 4 positive cases. Now, in this statement from Major League Baseball, it says the response outlined in the joint MLB-MLBPA operations manual was triggered immediately upon learning of the cluster of positive cases, including contact tracing and the quarantining and the testing identified of those close contacts, yet they still played the game. What happened here?
Well, the game was going to be played because under the protocols, when you have a positive test, it happened opening day with the Nationals. Juan Soto was positive. The game went on. It happened with the Cincinnati Reds when Moustakas and Senzel. The game went on. It happened with the Marlins with Alfaro and Ramirez and Cooper and Urena, who was the starting pitcher that day. The game goes on. What they do is they make sure that whoever has been around those players gets tested. The theory is you get the results of those tests before those players can get on the field, but if they're negative, they get to play. The problem has been the lagging results of the tests, but it's also not impossible, Amanda, that the 11 additional Marlins players who tested positive tested negative initially and then tested positive. What I hope we don't learn is that they were not tested before. Nobody was tested before Sunday's game. 4 people tested positive prior, so they couldn't play. Then there were not additional tests done. And then the 11 people tested positive when they got to the test after Sunday. I'm hoping that's not the case. I'm hoping it's a lagging issue, which means you do a test to a player and you're not waiting for the result as opposed to not doing the test. And if that's the case, Amanda, then MLB's got to get its act together and they've got to be testing people every single day.
All right, looking forward, this is somewhat... We didn't, as you said, nobody really could have predicted this, although possibly 15 players testing positive on one team. What does Major League Baseball do? We've heard them saying we're following the protocols, we're tweaking the protocols. In your opinion, what needs to happen with MLB, also with the players, to prevent this from happening moving forward?
Well, that's a funny question you're asking, because what you're saying is what can we do as a country to prevent COVID from spreading the way other countries have around the world, right? Where in Canada, Toronto had 4 positive tests total in all of Toronto, and the Marlins had 4 in their 20-by-20 clubhouse. So the question is, what can we do as a country? What can we do as a team, as an industry? You got to follow the rules. You've got to not be going out without a mask. You've got to not be putting yourself in an indoor space with other people for extended periods of time. If you don't feel well, you've got to stay home and not go to your office or not be involved with other people the way Rick Renteria did when he had the sniffles. He called the White Sox. He's the manager of the White Sox, and the White Sox said, stop. Right now, you're not managing. That's what baseball will have to do, is follow these protocols that are in place and follow them correctly. And one of the things we talked about on Nothing Personal is that there's no punishments for anyone who doesn't follow the protocols. In the NBA, if you miss a test like Porzingis, you're fined. If you leave the bubble like Lou Williams and get wings, you're quarantined for 10 days. Baseball has to come up with a negotiated agreement with the union where any players who violate any part of the protocols, they get fined. But we've always had a hard time getting the union to agree to anything. And when we fine players, it's $500. And I've had players pay me in advance a month worth of fines so they can do whatever they want, because $500 is $500. So I'm not sure what they're going to do.
All right. As you say, wait and see. We also want to mention Rick Renteria, his test did come back negative, so that was very good news. David Sampson, thank you so much for joining us. As he mentioned, his podcast, Nothing Personal with David Sampson. You can hear much more from David right there. Download and subscribe to where your podcasts are available. You can also check him out on YouTube. All right, so coming up, what does this mean for fantasy baseball? We'll talk about that on the other side of the break.
More breaking news in Major League Baseball. The Miami Marlins will not play again until at least Monday, and the Phillies won't play again until at least Friday. Those 2 seasons have been put on pause, as announced by Major League Baseball. So, Marlins won't play until at least Monday, Phillies Friday. The Yankees are going to now play at Baltimore on Wednesday and Thursday. And the Nationals, they were scheduled to play the Marlins this weekend. They will not play those games, obviously, in South Florida. Let's get a fantasy perspective on this from host of Fantasy Baseball Today, Frank Stamfel. I guess, what's the first priority right now? You kind of have a bunch of fires you have to put out right now if you're a commissioner. What's priority number one?
Yeah, I think priority number one as your commissioner is you have to be transparent. You have to reach out to your league mates. And this is an ongoing discussion that you have to have. I mean, the same way that we're seeing MLB kind of take this day by day, even hour by hour, realistically, because, I mean, we're getting schedule changes by the hour right now. You have to talk with your league mates. And if you have to make adjustments in season, I don't think that that's something that you should be opposed to doing. If your lineups were set for weekly, every single week for this season, I think you might want to consider changing that to daily. I mean, how about the integrity, the competitive integrity of fantasy here? You know, if a bunch of your players are out, if you have Marlins players or you have Phillies players or you had Nationals that you were expecting to have play in your lineup this weekend, you might want to switch to daily lineups so that you can make adjustments and you can make waiver wire adds. So I think these are all kind of fluid situations and conversations that you need to be having so that you can protect the integrity of the fantasy season as well.
How do you handle the Marlins right now? We know they're not going to play for the remainder of the week, and at the very earliest, they would play next Monday.
Yeah, so look, for me, I think that the only Marlins that should be rostered in fantasy right now are Jonathan Villar, Brian Anderson, Sandy Alcantara, who we saw have a phenomenal start on opening day last Friday, and then Brandon Kinsler, who is the closer for them and picked up a save as well. Saves are so hard to come by in fantasy baseball. I think those four players are ones that should be rostered right now, but more information is going to come out. We just saw earlier today that Miguel Rojas is one of the players that tested positive for COVID. He's batting 700, so he's someone that you might have just picked up in fantasy leagues, and rightfully so because he was off to a very hot start. But now I think you can consider dropping him, or you should place him on your IL. That's another conversation that you should be having for fantasy baseball purposes right now is, look, if you're playing with 3 IL spots for the season, you might want to up that to 5. You might want to up it to 8. You might want to make that unlimited spots because it seems like more positive tests are going to come out throughout the course of the season. So the 4 names I mentioned again, VR, Brian Anderson, Sandy Alcantara, and Brandon Kinsler should be rostered in fantasy. But again, it's a fluid situation because we could find out that one of those 4 players or all of them are one of the 15 players now that have tested positive for the Marlins. So just keep that in mind moving forward.
I think a lot of players, maybe even a lot of commissioners, are starting to panic right now, wondering how they can save their fantasy season and not knowing what to do. What's the number one piece of advice you have for them?
I would say stay patient, right? I mean, we knew it was going to be a crazy season, trying to fit 60 games in 66 days. In the midst of a global pandemic. I mean, this is something we've never seen before. This is uncharted territory for the MLB. It's uncharted territory for fantasy baseball. I would say, look, don't take it too seriously. Yes, a lot of people are competitive and you play to win the game in fantasy, but just realize that weird things are going to happen throughout the course of this season. Again, maybe make those IL spots unlimited. Maybe even have a taxi squad available for fantasy managers, similar to how the MLB has been handling this situation. If you still have weekly lineups and one of your players tests positive midweek, maybe you can sub that player out for someone who's on the waiver wire or on your bench. I mean, you're going to have to do things this season in fantasy baseball that we have never done before, similar to the way that MLB is handling this situation. So remain patient, try and have fun. I understand it's crazy times right now, but ultimately I would say the number one thing is to remain patient and be flexible with some of those rules.
Yeah, stay on your toes because we know this is far from the last storm that you're going to have to navigate this season in Major League Baseball. We are not even a week in, and already we have 2 teams that have paused their schedules. Our thanks to Frank Stamfel, the host of Fantasy Baseball Today. You can find that wherever you download your podcast. It's also available on video form on YouTube. Again, the Marlins putting their season on pause until at least Monday. The Phillies paused until at least Friday. Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.